Hello, and welcome back to our second podcast of the Fall 2020 Grow Clark County podcast series. I'm so glad you joined us. I'm Marty Farnes, the Relationships and Strategies Manager with Columbia River Economic Development Council. Last week, we heard from Ben Warnick, Assistant Professor of Entrepreneurship and Strategic Management with Washington State University's Carson College of Business. Ben encouraged all of you entrepreneurs on finding and keeping your business vision and staying true to your voice. Easy to say, not always easy to do. It was a great conversation, and if you missed it, it's not too late to catch it. You can find it on our website and social media pages, such as LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, which, by the way, if you're not following us, we'd appreciate it if you would. Today, I have a special guest, May Wu Fergus, co-founder and VP of Corporate Development with Speak Technologies. May has an abundance of business experience working at Hewlett-Packard, AT&T, and others, and also includes starting or co-starting 5 software companies. Today, May will share about her startup experiences, but she also talks on the very important topic of fundraising, which I know from the connections I have with startups, this is a very important subject and one you'll be glad you heard. Before we dive in, I want to remind you to be sure and check out our WebEx on November 19th, where all of our podcast guests from this series will be joining us. Not only will we continue these conversations, but you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So please mark it on your calendar and share it with your network, November 19th. Also, I want to say how appreciative we are for IQ Credit Union's support of the Fall 2020 Grow Clark County series, Startup Stories. It's because of their support these podcasts are available. And now, before we hear from May, a quick word from Julie Ahrens, Assistant Vice President of Business Services with IQ Credit Union.
Hey, business owners, thank you so much for logging in and clicking in today. We're super excited that you're joining us. My name is Julie Ahrens, also known as IQ Julie, and I'm blessed to work for IQ Credit Union, your local nonprofit, non-bank financial institution in town. We've been around since 1940 helping business owners make their business dreams come true. So whether you're a startup business and you have this dream and you're not ready to take it to the next step, or maybe you've done this for a really long time and you're ready to get out of business, so maybe you need help with succession planning or retirement planning. Whatever stage you're at in your business dream and in your business journey, IQ Credit Union is ready to help you. We've got a large team of business loan officers, business bankers, business account specialists, and we would love to partner with you. So thank you so much for joining us. We're super proud to sponsor the CREDC live podcast series. And whether you're clicking in for the first podcast or maybe you're clicking in just for the live panel event at the end, whatever it is, we're excited you joined us. The Credit Union is super excited to be part of this important series, helping business owners' dreams come true. So next time you need a business loan, business or some other business service, we hope you'll consider IQ Credit Union. You'll be glad you did. Enjoy.
Hi, May.
Well, hi, Marty.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today.
Yes. Well, first of all, Marty, thank you for having me. I'm very grateful for what CREDC provides for Clark County, and I'm honored to be here. So let me start with a little bit about my background.
Yeah, love that.
I'm actually originally from the Silicon Valley, and I moved here from my hometown in San Jose over 30 years ago. I'm dating myself here. So Vancouver is actually home for me. I actually moved up to the Pacific Northwest to be with who's now my husband, whom I originally met while working for Hewlett-Packard and Company. So after I finished my undergraduate college there, I was lucky enough to work for large companies such as HP and AT&T, which is wonderful for starting your career when you're in your 20s.
Right.
And because my husband worked for HP for a few decades, he was kind of considered the steady Eddie in our family, which allowed me to go take risk. And so that's how I got involved in startups. And so really for the last 30 years, I worked with 5 software startups that eventually led to exits to publicly traded companies. And they were companies such as Symantec, Oracle, Cisco, TransUnion, and most recently last year to Adtran. So fast forward to today, I'm actually working on my sixth and hopefully last, we'll see, startup called Speak Technologies.
Yeah, that's amazing, May. I just have to say, I love hearing that story, and I love just all of the experience that you bring to this conversation. And I know those who are listening are going to get a lot from what you're going to share. So very good. And I've lived here for 30 years as well. So we have that in common, and Vancouver is home to me as well. It's a great place to be, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yay. Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. I fear that I've aged myself by saying that, but whatever, right? You just go with it. So May, you mentioned Speak Technologies. Will you share a little bit about your most recent venture?
Sure. So I'm with a startup called Speak Technologies. And what we do is we make a software as a service, otherwise known as SaaS, platform called Albi. And Albi is responsible for the disappearance of meeting notes as we know it. So we do this by leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to let Albi do sort of like the busy work. And what we ultimately want to do is allow participants to be fully engaged in meetings instead of scribing or typing, while we let Albi do the busy work of taking notes. So I tell my kids, or somebody kind of in layman's terms, think of Albi as your personal scribe.
Yeah, for sure. That's a much welcomed technology and help, I know, to many of us.
Well, especially today's online Zoom meeting world, right? Where, especially if you're on video, you don't have the luxury of typing away your notes anymore. You have to kind of sit there and be active. Yeah,
for sure. So, so this is your most recent, which is exciting, and I love the concept. But there's probably a lot of lessons that you've learned with all of your startups. What would you say is a recurring concern that you have encountered?
Oh gosh, there are so many lessons in startups and so many mistakes that we made along the way, but that's a part of learning.
Right.
You can go in so many different directions, everything from finding the right team members to, finding the people with the right background, let alone chemistry, because that's a big part of it. There's, obviously reviewing market opportunities and fit, looking at competitions, building pitch decks. You can go on and on and on, and so many lessons, so many errors, and so many mistakes that we made.
Right.
But one thing that was very apparent, there's one constant in common for all startups, and it's that all startups need financing. And in fact, I think this may be the number one worry for all new entrepreneurs.
Right.
Is financing.
I would say that that's what I hear when I'm talking with startups repeatedly, consistently. So, yeah. So where do startups generally go for capital?
Sure. There's lots of different places you can go. Ideally, if your business is generating some kind of income, or maybe if the founders are somewhat wealthy, ideally it would be great if we can bootstrap the startup. In fact, for Speak Technologies, my co-founders and I bootstrapped it for the first year, and we didn't take any salary. So, and that's kind of key without giving away too much of your company, because once you start financing, then, you know, you lose a little bit of leverage in terms of share of the company. So, but, you know, there are also other ways. You see a lot of businesses take bank loans, like from the SBAs. In fact, I love the story of Henry Schuck of Discover.org, which is now ZoomInfo. You know, you hear his story early on, and he financed his company on 2 credit cards in the early days.
Right.
So that's fun to see and hear, because that's probably not the norm these days.
Right.
But in terms of capital, I think most common that you hear in the market now is people go to friends and family. That is by far the most common way to generate a little bit of capital early on. You know, just because your friends and families are the ones that believe in you. They know your history. They believe in what you do, right? But that kind of runs out fairly quickly too,
right,
after a little while.
And
so
for most of us, there's only so much our friends and family can give. So you're right.
Yes. Yes. So eventually you're going to have to turn to other options for capital. And for a lot of companies that decided to push the go button, they would look to angel investors or super angels from kind of the seed perspective. And then there's also venture capital. In our local markets, you'll see firms like Oregon Venture Fund and the Portland Seed Fund, for example. And then you can kind of go up the food chain to venture and debt equity, private equity firms, larger firms. So those are kind of like the variations of funding. But what I actually wanted to highlight today is just the new options that have come into the marketplace, which are only a few years old. And that is the concept of crowdfunding. I don't know if you've heard of crowdfunding before.
Yeah, but share with us.
Sure. It's kind of like, I think people might have heard of Kickstarters, which you see a lot of times for B2C firms. But crowdfunding, it's actually called regulation crowdfunding. It allows for investors to have a small stake in the company or ownership. In other words, it's like investing in startups. And that was only made possible because of the Jobs Act of 2016, eventually kind of updated in 2017. What the Jobs Act allowed is angel investing for everyone, not just accredited investors. Because if you go back to the definition of accredited investors, that equates to like 1% of the population here. And crowdfunding opens up the door to the other 99% of the population to allow them to not only invest in startups, but allows the companies to raise money from the other 99%. So that is big, and that definitely is you know, it changed the game for raising capital here.
For sure. And so the next thing that I want to ask you, and this might tie into it, so there might be some duplication here, but I know that Speak Technologies just went through its initial financing round. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got there?
Oh, sure, Marty. It's a fun little story here, actually. In the first 6 months of trying to raise capital, you know, we were making good progress, talking to angel investors. We met some super angels. We attended things like the Ben Venture Conference. But then COVID-19 hit, and that was back in March, obviously, of 2020 when the lockdown just occurred. So from then on, it cut off pretty much all our face-to-face meetings. And we had a choice to make. We can either ride this out and wait for the pandemic to be over, which, as we know, it's still not, or we can kind of pivot and see what else we can do to finish our fundraising round.
Right.
So we actually pivoted, and we were introduced to a crowdfunding organization called WeFunder. This is a regulation crowdfunding companies where, again, we can raise money online, investors can get a small stake in the company, and that's how you raise money. And so now, because of this Jobs Act and the Title III of Jobs Act for crowdfunding, it allows us to raise, I think the maximum amount is like $1 million and change due to inflation within a 12-month period. So the point I want to make is that crowdfunding, especially with the Jobs Act, is really a game changer because now we can open up this kind of online fundraising, capital raise round to the other 99% of the population versus just the 1% of accredited investors. So that's a big change.
Yeah, for sure. So what was the ultimate outcome of your fundraising efforts?
Well, I'm happy to say now that it's over, we were pleasantly surprised at the success, and I'll share with you kind of 3 points of our fundraising round. First of all, we raised about $800,000 in a few months.
Wow.
And over half of that amount, amount came in just the first few weeks. So we were definitely encouraged to see the traction there. The second thing is we also got a lot of unexpected press. In other words, we got marketing benefits without spending a dime on advertising. Because if you think about it, the round that we raised was to over 1,000 investors. And so we had 1,000 eyeballs on Albi.
Right.
And actually, you can say more than that because some people look at it and don't necessarily put in the money. So that was kind of a neat surprise without spending any money on marketing or advertising. And I think finally the other surprise we had was, as a bonus, we had a few hundred leads out of that, which just gave us lots of joy because if you think about these investors, a lot of these investors potentially work for a company or they have friends that work for a company, and they would say to us, I want to check this out because I might be able to bring this into my organization and have Albi help us with our meetings. So that was a nice bonus.
Perk. Yeah, nice perk of the system. That's great.
Yeah.
So thinking about some of the mistakes that are often made, you kind of almost build the plane as you fly it, because for many, this is the first time of going through something like this. But what are some of the common mistakes entrepreneurs need to be aware of when they're raising capital?
Yes, lots of different tunnels to kind of go down. But I would say maybe the first mistake is losing hope early on. I have to say, entrepreneurs need patience.
Yes.
Lots of patience. I think people forget that just even the average time to raise a seed round is 3 to 6 months. It's not weeks; it's months, and it's a time and effort grueling process because I think, what did they say? On average, you have to contact 58 investors if you were going the angel route, for example. People have over 40 to 50 different investor meetings with most of them saying no.
Right.
And then, of course, the average raise for kind of a seed or pre-seed round is anywhere from $1 to $2 million, if you will, to kind of get companies started. So that's sort of the first mistake is losing hope early on because it takes patience. I'd say the second mistake is failing to reach out all your connections.
Mm-hmm.
There's that old saying, what you know, but
right.
who you know.
Yep.
And that definitely is true, because you have to reach out to sort of everybody, industry experts, your friends, your family, domain experts. And really what you're looking for are the well-connected people. Because even if it's not those folks can oftentimes give you introductions to others. And we think about, like for us, down the road, if we want to raise a Series A or Series B in the future, those VC introductions are critical. And a lot of the VCs put weight on these opportunities that they have when they get them from a friendly intro or friendly person that they know. So that is kind of a second stake. Don't be afraid to reach out to all your connections.
Right.
And then I will spend time on kind of a third mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs do make, and that is determining the appropriate target amount, meaning asking for too much or asking for too little money. I'll give you some examples. One of my friends originally was doing a startup, and he went out to the market and says, I want to raise $50 million. And I just about fell off the floor and went, what? For a seed round? Like, yeah, what's wrong with that? Help me with my business plan, et cetera, et cetera. But it really is too much for a seed round. On the other hand, we at Speak Technologies started out by asking too little. At first, we thought about raising, let's just raise $300,000 as our initial goal. But as we learned quickly, we were oversubscribed, so we kind of bumped it up to $500,000. And then from there, we were quickly oversubscribed as well. So we eventually let it ride, and we finally closed it out at about $800,000 or so. So I think the key, though, to determining the right amount is really what series are you in and what's appropriate based on kind of the product and the life cycle of the company. And so, for example, bringing it back to Speak Technologies, we're in the concept or prototype stage. We're trying to test the idea for market fit. And so we were definitely in the kind of pre-seed and seed round, which, on average, folks raise about $2 million or so. So it depends on where you are with the product. Eventually, as I mentioned, we'd like to get to Series A, and then perhaps B or C. And those are really kind of product stage related. So for Speak, for example, the Series A typically is reserved for like a minimal viable product stage, MVP stage. And so we're hoping to get there within a year or so. So time will tell.
Right. Yeah. Those are some interesting thoughts. And I can see where determining the kind of that sweet spot amount can be tricky, and knowing like how to identifying just that right amount. So
yeah, and it's not to say there's a perfect science to it. A lot of it depends on market factors and other things going on in the world, but generally it's series appropriate based on the life cycle of kind of the product of your company.
Sure. So in regards to fundraising, what would you say to entrepreneurs?
Sure. The one thing I will say is there has never been a better time to be an entrepreneur, even in this crazy COVID world. And I'll kind of back that up with kind of the 3 points for that is, first of all, there's so much access to information on the web today. You can do research, you can find out about competition, you can look at how-to videos. There's so much information on there, so you can do it all from your house.
Yeah.
Yeah, and second, I would say just with the advent of technology, there's such a lower cost of operating companies anymore. For example, there's so many cloud-based tools that make doing business real easy, such as like the DocuSigns of the world to sign contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And even cloud storage is inexpensive. You see Google Cloud, AWS, that makes hosting your websites and applications so much cheaper than spending CapEx on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think finally, with the Jobs Act coming in place within the last few years, we now have democratization of fundraising and investing to all. So I think entrepreneurs, they have access to online crowdfunding capital, again, even without needing the ability to leave the house. So I would say, I think overall, to close this out, and if I, want to just give my shout out to entrepreneurs is, hang in there and take a chance, be bold, and go after it.
No, I appreciate that, and I love how you just encouraged by saying there's never been a better time, because if you go by what you feel and what you see, you might think the opposite. So that's really good encouragement for those who are thinking of jumping in, for those who jumped in during this crazy time, and perhaps those who launched their venture prior to COVID and are now questioning. So it's just good encouragement. Thank you, May. And
well, definitely, it's my pleasure to talk with you today, Marty. So thank you for having me.
And thank you for everything that you do for our community too, May. We just really, really appreciate you, and thank you for sharing your experience as an entrepreneur, as a serial entrepreneur. And I'm glad that we all have the opportunity to learn from you. So thank you. I really enjoyed hearing from May, and I hope you did too. Don't forget about our panel WebEx on November 19th. And if you have questions after listening to any of our podcasts, join us and bring those questions. I also want to give a shout out to WSU Vancouver's Business Growth Mentor and Analysis Program through the Carson College of Business for their partnership. Join us next week and hear from entrepreneur Josh Engelbrecht, CEO of the construction technology company Toolbelt. Josh will share his startup story, which will include some of the challenges he's faced as well as the solutions. For those starting up a business or thinking of starting a business, you won't want to miss next week. On behalf of CREDC, thanks so much for listening and have a fantastic week.